Short questions, short answers by Torah teacher Ariel and eBible. They bring the questions, I bring the answers, and usually my answers are right. Okay, here's the question for tonight. What does it mean that if those who depend on the law are heirs, faith means nothing and the promise is worthless? This is taken from Romans 4:14. NIV reads, "For if those who depend on the law are heirs, faith means nothing and the promise is worthless." What is Paul talking about in this passage? In my experience, as a Messianic Jew, that is, one who believes in Yeshua Jesus, yet follows the Torah, the law of Moses, I have found that many of the standard Christian answers to Paul's teachings unfortunately characterize the first century Judaisms as legalists seeking to earn their way into heaven by keeping the commandments. This is an unfortunate stereotype and mischaracterization of the Jewish people of the first century. Let's see if we can sort this out. This overly simplistic caricature, in my understanding, is historically inaccurate, not just because I'm a Jew, but because history doesn't line up with it. The Judaisms of Paul's day did not believe mere commandment keeping saved them. I'll say it again. Therefore, Paul would not have needed to write to anyone, Jews especially, but also including Gentiles, to stop striving to keep the law for salvific purposes because they didn't hold the Torah in that manner. Allow me to present what I believe is an answer that is closer to the socio-religious challenges that the Apostle Paul faced as he was moving in and among Gentile Christians seeking legitimacy in an otherwise Jewish members-only social club like the first century Judaisms were portrayed. Okay, you guys ready? I'm going to describe the way I understand the social setting, and this will give us the background to the verse. Paul uses the word law in this particular verse, but he may in fact be referring not to the concept of law proper in and of itself, but instead to a flawed theological policy long held in religious Israel, a policy that he once held to himself, a policy he now teaches against in many of his letters. So it's not necessarily just the law by itself, there's something behind it. Paul calls this policy, quote, works of the law, end quote, 6 times in his letter to Romans and Galatians combined. We got Romans 3:20, 3:28, Galatians 2:16, 3:2, 3:5, and 3:10. And sometimes he also uses the shorthand term circumcision, and other times he only uses the single word law. So all of these terms kind of indicate the same social concept, and that's what we're going to be describing here in this short little video teaching for tonight. Okay, so pay attention. The verse says, "For if those who depend on the law are heirs, faith means nothing and the promise is worthless." Romans 4:14, NIV once again. So what does he mean? I believe he's using law in this particular technical sense in this verse to refer not just to keeping the law, but to something a little more detailed. This flawed policy is that all Jewish Israel and only Jewish Israel has a place in the world to come, aka heaven, based on their ethnic status as Jews. And if a Gentile wanted to get into the group, they had to undergo proselyte conversion to become a legally recognized Jew. So we're talking about restrictions that are being placed on non-Jewish people if they too want to be counted as genuine covenant members. Based on this flawed theological policy that I'm describing, I would actually translate the verse in question using my own paraphrase thusly, quote, "For if it is the adherents of the Jewish-only membership policy who are to be the heirs, then faith is null and the promise is void," end quote. You understand what I mean by my paraphrase there? If salvation hinges on your ethnic status, then faith is worthless, right? Does that seem to make sense so far? So keep listening. Unlocking Paul's many uses of the word law, the Greek is nomos, goes a long way, in my opinion, on developing one of the core hermeneutic keys to historically understanding Paul's letters. Paul teaches in this passage and this verse that, quote, "it is not the adherents of the law who are to be heirs." It's not the adherents of the law. On the one hand, mere mechanical law-keeping will never save anyone, nor will sincere law-keeping for that matter. We affirm that, right? The Torah was not given of God to provide salvation of the soul. So on the theological level, it's true that keeping the law doesn't save us. In fact, keeping the law has never saved anyone. It never has, it never will. It was not designed to bring a person to the point of salvation. It wasn't designed to bring a person into salvation by the mere keeping. But this is not Paul's argument in my understanding. Paul is arguing against Jewish-only membership into Israel, viz., only Jews can be saved. Now, he's arguing against that because that theology is also errant. You see, in their segregated way of thinking of the first century, all of covenant Israel was comprised of Jewish people only, viz., everyone in Israel was a Jew. And if a non-Jew wanted to attain corporate salvation both now and after they died, that person needed to legally convert to become a Jew first and thus join Jewish Israel, quote unquote. So Jews were the saved ones and Gentiles were the unsaved ones, and you had to cross this ethnic boundary in order to get into the saved community. Now, once they were legally recognized as Jewish, their place in the physical covenant was ostensibly maintained by keeping the Torah. Okay, what are our conclusions for tonight's short Bible study? If we study the New Testament as an historical document alongside the other extant oral teachings that have survived from the first century Judaism, such as the rabbinic commentaries, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Gemara, etc., as well as corroborate the theology of the Old Testament in proper context, right, what Moshe talked about, then we begin to get a more accurate picture of the pattern of theology of the first century Jewish people. And what we discover is that the Jewish concept of individual/group salvation, what we find out is that this cannot be easily caricatured by simplistic merit theology, the way historic Christianity has traditionally characterized Jewish devotion to Torah. Check out my podcasts, which are available on iTunes. You can search for me in the store under the search term Ariel Hanavi. But if you prefer to watch your theology, check out my YouTube channel, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and click the bell for notifications. New content is added weekly or even daily.